John O'Keefe's family has gone through 2 trials at this point, but there's another family in Canton still looking for answers. With us today is Audio Chuck reporter Taylor Hartz, who has been looking into the death of Craig Casey. Welcome, Taylor. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Brandy. Thanks for having me. While we were reporting on this case, we came across an audit that was done on the Canton PD. Basically, the residents in Canton voted to have this audit done, to have somebody from outside the town come in, take a look, try to make some sense of what's going on. And obviously, we all know that the way they investigated the death of John O'Keefe and the case they built against Karen Reed has been investigated and talked about to no end. But there's actually 2 other victims that they're really taking a hard look at here. Sandra Birchmore was a young woman who was reported to have died by suicide in her apartment. And when the feds came in and took a harder look, they found that Sandra hadn't died by suicide at all. She'd actually been killed. And her death is now being investigated as a homicide, and a Stoughton police officer named Matthew Farwell has been charged with allegedly being responsible for her death after grooming her since she was a teenager in the Police Explorers program. And that's one that we talked about in our episode on Karen Reed that we reported on here at Crime Junkie. We also came across a third case, an investigation into the death of a man named Craig Casey, who allegedly died in a motor vehicle accident on Christmas Eve in 2018. And as if this couldn't get any more bizarre, Craig was also found dead on another front lawn in Canton. So according to official reports, Craig died as a result of a single vehicle accident on Christmas Eve in 2018. Local reports say that he allegedly sideswiped another vehicle in nearby Stoughton and then maybe kind of fled that scene and then was speeding down a road in Canton and hit a tree, kind of spun out, and was eventually ejected from his car. But when officers arrived at the scene, it was called in by a person who was passing by around 5 a.m. and saw that there was a vehicle that had crashed. They didn't find Craig. Does that sound familiar at all? He's on a lawn, dead, and nobody in the Canton Police Department happens to see him. So what they do see is that this vehicle is wrecked. It's clearly hit a tree. There's a tree down in the road. And they reportedly look around and kind of just assume that the driver had maybe fled into some nearby woods. I think from the registration, they were able to figure out that Craig had been involved in another incident earlier and seemed to be like trying to get away from the cops. So maybe he just ran from the scene. But they must not have looked around very much. They did tow the car. They picked up the fallen tree, and then they kind of just called it a day. They didn't call in the fire department. They didn't call any paramedics. And that is extra concerning because there were car seats in the back of this car. So no one thought to think, hey, here's a vehicle that potentially had kids in it that is now empty, totaled on the side of the road. Where are the people? But again, they don't really look around that much until 7 a.m. when, this is going to sound familiar again, somebody calls dispatch in Canton and says, hey, we just found a body on a front lawn. When they did find Craig's body, it wasn't very far from where his vehicle had crashed. It was 94 feet away from the vehicle. That is not far at all. That's if you're turning and you're looking in your immediate area, you're looking within 94 feet. Even if it's dark outside, if you have so much as a flashlight, this is something they should have seen. This isn't like a heavily wooded area. There isn't a tree line. There aren't shrubs. It is just wide open. It was nighttime. It was dark. So we'll give them that. That's something that we dealt with in Karen and John's case as well. But they should have been able to see him because, again, he's just right on the lawn, right out in the open. But here's the other thing. Craig's body wasn't just found on any lawn. He was found 200 feet from John O'Keefe's front lawn. None of us know what that means, but it seems too coincidental that these 2 cases that are being investigated for police just not seeing these bodies on these lawns are connected in that way. And I'm gonna, again, take it a step further because when police get there and they are on dispatch being like, dude, I don't know how we didn't see this, that same cop is saying, I think we need to call in state police. They're finally gonna call the fire department. So they do call in detectives, and guess who they call to come to the scene?
I don't even want to know, do I?
I bet you can guess the last name. They call Kevin Albert. and he is the detective who responds to the scene to investigate Craig Casey's death. And I'm sure I don't need to explain this to anybody who's listening here, but Kevin Albert is the brother of Brian Albert, and Brian Albert is the owner of the home whose lawn John O'Keefe would later be found dead on.
And if this was happening right by John O'Keefe's house, that would mean it's also right by Chris Albert's house because he was living right there at the time too. So it's like another weird connection there too, right?
Yeah, and like I guess part of the question here is, are all these things connected just because this town is so small? Is that just the nature of a small town, or is there something bigger happening here?
Yeah. And now you talked to Craig's family, right?
I did, and that's one of the questions that they're asking. They've always had questions about what happened to Craig and how police didn't see him and how this all unfolded. But as all of these similarities have been pointed out, mostly by people doing some web sleuthing online and posting things on TikTok, Craig's brother, Brian Casey, told me that his phone has been blowing up. They're getting tagged in all kinds of content. They're having people send them messages saying, did you see this? Did you see that people are talking about this? And to some extent, they've wanted this level of attention on Craig's case because they have had so many questions. And Brian told me that he's not sure if this is part of some larger conspiracy, but what he is sure of is that it's never made sense to them. It's never made sense to them that nobody saw his brother on that lawn. That's a sentence that we're just hearing all too often in Canton. And when I talked to Brian, he told me that they've actually gone back to the scene, him and his dad. They've met with police officers and detectives from state police and Canton police, and they've gone back to try to reconstruct it themselves. And it honestly seems like every time they try to do that, they get further and further from understanding how this could have occurred. And they have more and more questions. They don't necessarily agree that this is part of some massive conspiracy theory, but they're also not ruling it out. They just want answers at this point. And Brian told me that one of the things that he has heard as people have been reaching out to him is the question of like why his family has never taken legal action against the Canton PD. Why haven't they sued them? Why haven't they pushed harder? And he said that just because they haven't done that yet doesn't mean that they haven't thought about it. Like I said, they have not stopped trying to find answers about not only what happened to Craig, but about what police didn't do when they got to the scene that morning. And another interesting thing to note is that Brian, Craig's brother, is a firefighter in the greater Boston area. So he's no stranger to how these motor vehicle accidents, and especially severe motor vehicle accidents where there's fatalities or where the vehicle is totaled, are handled within these departments. The fire department should have been called right away. EMS should have been called right away. There should have been some sort of staging with lights to illuminate the area around and really look for his brother.
Yeah. Are there any like records or police footage or anything like that from the scene? Because that would be one of my first thoughts.
So it's interesting because in this audit that was done on the Canton Police Department, the company that did the audit issued a report and it's hundreds of pages long. And the section about Craig's case is pretty short. And when I asked Brian Casey about that, he said that that's another thing they've pushed for. They've asked for dash cam video from the police cruisers that responded to the scene that morning for the initial call of the accident and for the call of the body on the lawn. And he's been told that there isn't any dash cam footage. And he's asked for records and hasn't really gotten anything. So I asked for the records. I reached out to Canton PD, and to be honest, I was really surprised. I heard back right away. Like, I have asked a lot of police departments for a lot of records over the years, and this might be the fastest I've ever had someone send me an actual drive with all the files I've requested on it. Their public information officer was like following up with me, which is normally 80% of my job is to bug them and say, hey, where are these files? But she was actually emailing me and saying like, hey, I just want to make sure that you sent the flash drive. Hey, I just want to make sure you got it. Hey, I just want to make sure you're able to open the files. Like, it seemed like they were doing everything they can to make sure that we had access to the records we wanted to see. And they did. The drive worked and there was a bunch of files on them, and me and a couple other people on our team went through those when we got the flash drive and again this morning. And although there are a lot of files, there's just nothing that really tells us much about Craig's case. There are those initial 911 calls, and there is some dash cam footage, more than I expected, but it didn't really show us anything. It's dated from the day that Craig Casey's death was investigated and when he was found dead, but there's no timestamp. It's kind of hard to tell by the light what time of day it is, but it looks like the morning, but it's definitely not from 5 a.m. in December when they first went to that scene. So Begs the question, if police responding later that morning had dash cams in their vehicles, where's the dash cam footage from the officer who responded that morning?
Yeah, good point. I'm honestly shocked they sent you anything. So,
Me too. I was really surprised. And Massachusetts State Police answered my records request too. They took a little longer, they took a few weeks, but they did send me their records of their investigation and they sent me their collision analysis. There's some interesting information there that tells us a little bit more about the crash. It kind of elaborates a little more on whatever happened in Stoughton earlier and includes some analysis they did of the scene itself and of Craig's vehicle. And some of the most notable things in those reports were that Craig was definitely speeding at the time of the crash. It seemed like he was going somewhere around 80 miles per hour in a zone that I think was supposed to be like 30 miles per hour. And he did have alcohol in his system. And those are listed as the things that contributed to this crash. The language on the report itself actually says that it was caused by like driver behavior and indicates that it seems like Craig was coming around a curve, lost control of his vehicle, probably because of the rate of speed he was going, and struck a tree. And after that, it seems like his vehicle kind of spun out a little bit and then rolled over. And during that rollover is when they believe Craig was ejected from the vehicle. And you can hear in some of the dispatch conversations from police that we got from the Canton department that their working theory is maybe that like he was ejected from the vehicle and then either adrenaline or fear or not wanting to interact with police, he kind of took off into the woods and then maybe he stumbled back to that front lawn. But again, we don't know what happened because there isn't a lot of footage, there isn't a lot of information. All we know is the police say there was no driver at 5 a.m. and less than 2 hours later, someone driving by could just see a body on the lawn. And again, that's something that we've heard, you know, like it reminds me of when I was reporting on the Karen Reed episode for Crime Junkie. It's all these detectives are at the scene and they are not seeing these pieces of taillight in the lawn. And then a few days later, somebody's driving by and just happens to see them from the road.
yeah, it is weird because there are so many parallels to this, and everything, of course, is involving, once again, Canton PD and, the Alberts. And I guess small towns have a way of having coincidences, but that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and again, all of these things could just be coincidences. We could just chalk it up to a small town. Like, of course, the Alberts are going to be involved in some way because it seems like they kind of touch everything in Canton. But at the end of the day, we're talking about three different cases that are part of this audit in which some outside agency is taking a look from the top down and saying, this wasn't handled the way it should have been. And so far in John O'Keefe's case and in Sandra Birchmore's case, when they've taken that hard look, we found out a lot more about what went down. We do know that there's more information than initial investigators maybe would have led us to believe. And I'm curious to see if that happens in Craig Casey's case too. I know that the team here at Audio Chuck is looking into Sandra Birchmore's case a lot more and into the Police Explorers program as a whole that she was involved in. And we're going to keep looking into Craig Casey's death too. And Brian Casey told us that as hard as it's been to have people sending him all of this information about his brother's case and spewing sometimes kind of wild theories, like they do appreciate the attention that it's bringing. They've been kind of trying to raise the red flag and sound alarm bells on this for years. And the more questions we can ask, hopefully the more answers we can get and the more answers that family can get. So we're going to keep digging here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to find out what y'all are able to dig up. So you have to keep us updated on everything.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks, Brandy.
Thanks, Taylor.